Okay, well, whilst we're just waiting for the next few people to join us, we'll say a little bit about this series of webinars. So we'll be running a series of 3 fire prevention plan webinars as part of this process. This first webinar is going to give an overview of the new requirements and explain a little bit about what compliance looks like. The second will give the firefighter's perspective. We'll be joined by Phil Pinches, who is an experienced fireman who has had involvement in preparing waste prevention plans and has dealt with a range of fires that give him a lot of experience to bring to this subject. And the third, we're going to be looking for our audience to shape a little. We'll be wanting to find out from you topics that you would like us to cover, and we'll say a little bit more about that over the course of the next 2 webinars to give you the chance to decide a little bit about what you might like us to cover. We will be taking questions at the end of this webinar. There will be an opportunity to submit questions all the way through, which I should introduce our speaker today. That is Sophie Crosswell, who is one of our consultants here at Eunomia, and we're very glad to be able to offer a bit of expertise from Sophie, who has been involved in a number of fire prevention plan projects and running training on fire prevention issues in Wales. And so she has built up quite a range of knowledge of how the fire prevention plan system works and some practical experience of submitting FPPs for approval by the Environment Agency and some of the pathways to success in that endeavour. So a little bit of background on fire prevention plans. Although they're currently only required for those who've suffered a fire or those who are creating new or substantially varied permits, this requirement is likely to extend to all permit holders over the course of the next few years, and so it's as well for any person who's operating a waste site to have a good understanding of what the fire prevention plan requirements are. Even if you're not currently obligated, there may well be some environmental, operational or risk management advantages to adopting a fire prevention plan at this early stage voluntarily. But there can also be some pitfalls to that sort of early adoption. If you don't do it in the right way, it can leave you with problems to manage into the future, and therefore it's important to understand what the best ways are in which to create a fire prevention plan that will help you to avoid those risks. We're basing the comments we provide today on the training we've been providing across Wales and on our successful experience of preparing fire prevention plans in England. And we're very interested to hear about your experience and the questions you might have about the fire prevention plan process. And as I said, those will be addressed at the end. I'm going to hand over to Sophie Crosswell, who will take you through the presentation we're going to give you today.
Hello everybody. So today we are going to talk about fire prevention plans, and this is sort of an overview session. So the second sessions are going to look in more detail at the guidance and overcoming the problems of writing a fire prevention plan, but this is sort of a high-level context introduction. So as I've mentioned, there are 3 seminars that will be happening. Today's is the first. Next time we'll be talking to Phil Pinches to get a firefighter's perspective, and then the third session will be very much focused on the issues people are having in applying for fire prevention plans with the EA, or if they're thinking about it, how to work around those issues. So today's session is a brief introduction, and that starts off with a bit of context and background on fire prevention plan guidance. Then we're going to look at how it affects you as an operator. And as Peter mentioned, there are some pros and cons around the benefits of early adoption, so we're going to take a look at those. And then the final part of today's session is looking at how you can start to prepare a fire prevention plan and the first things that you need to consider. So starting off with the context, The main point to point out here is that over the last 10 to 15 years, we've really seen a change in how waste is managed in the UK. So 10 to 15 years ago, there was a lot of material going into landfill, with it being collected from households and turned around to disposal relatively quickly. With the push towards making the most of our resources and increasing our recycling rates, we've seen a drastic increase in the level of material processing. Not only does this result in the material being above ground for much longer periods of time, it also increases the risk in exposing materials to ignition sources. So if you think about recycling materials that used to just go into landfill, they're now going to MRFs to be separated into their separate material streams, and then they're going on from there for further processing. So whilst it's going through the sorting process, there's potential spark sensors that could ignite a fire, or just the heat generated from the processing of the material. So overall, the level of risk within the waste industry has increased just as a result of how we are choosing to manage our waste now. And obviously, as we push for higher recycling rates and look at the circular economy package, this is only going to become a more prominent issue. The second element behind the prominence now of fire prevention plan guidance is there has been an increase in the profile of waste fires. It's hard to ascertain due to the lack of data whether there has been an increase in the significant number of waste fires on site, or whether the profile of these fires has just become more public. So it used to predominantly hide in the trade press, but now it makes national news, which again, as soon as you get your public involved, they start asking questions. They're challenging people, they're putting pressure on the government and the EA to look at the water that we're using in fires. You know, not only the amount of water we're applying and the processes it takes to clean that water and then apply it to a fire, but then you're also looking at the aspects of fire water runoff, so the water going into the environment, soaking into the groundwater, going into rivers. You've got the social aspects. People are starting to say, well, if all those firemen are at that site dealing with the fire, then they're not able to help a house fire incident or a road traffic accident. You know, they're not on hand to help civilian incidents. They're dealing with waste fires. And the other aspect is, as we push to more recycling, you've got that increase in waste storage on the surface, and therefore, you know, we're increasing that risk. There has been speculation that a lot of the waste fires have been down to poor performance or illegal sites, where on the whole that seems to be true. The most significant events have had underlying causes. The truth is that we all know a waste site that's well run, that's had a fire incident, so I don't think we can pretend it's dodgy Joe Blogs around the corner. I think we all need to take responsibility and step forward in helping move the industry towards a less flammable future, shall we say. So as a result, in how the waste is managed and looking to improve the reputation that the waste industry's got for fires in recent years, the agency has responded with the fire prevention plan guidance. So the two main forms of this at the moment are in England and Wales. So initially the fire prevention plan guidance was issued in England in March 2015. That was then revised after significant public consultation, and the latest guidance was published in July last year. This, compared to the first round, is much easier to use and actually offers some advice and guidance. So if you've only read the initial publication, I strongly recommend you read the latest version, as it's somewhat more digestible. The response in Wales has been slightly different, so they're a bit behind the process in England, and so they're still on version 1 of their fire prevention and mitigation plan. So there's more emphasis in Wales on the mitigation of waste fires. They're currently looking at their guidance, so they've gone for a period of review, and they are updating it in line with the WISH live fire tests that have been undertaken. So we'll have some evidence base for the Welsh guidance. As I said, they're currently working on that. There's no firm date for when that will be released, but it's expected to be in the next 2 or 3 months. So we've got this guidance now, and we're going to have to live with it whether we like it or not, and as an industry try to work within it. So we're now going to look at the impact fire prevention plan guidance has on you as an operator. So nobody can argue that the point of the guidance is a step in the wrong direction. I think we all agree that it's a good start, and the 3 main objectives of the guidance make sense on the whole. So the first one is to do with reducing the risk of a fire on site, so fire prevention. The next two relate to mitigating the effects if a fire does occur. So the first one is to reduce the spread. So if you've got a fire in one pile, doing your best to keep it in that one pile. And the second is looking at the impacts when that event happens on your site. So starting to think before the fire happens what your social, environmental and economic impacts could be. Obviously, a lot of that depends on where you're situated, but they're all things we can think about. Regardless of where you are, if you're in the countryside, you might think, oh, I'm cool, but there's a river next to you that has some special wildlife species in it, and that's a complete game changer. So thinking about these things up front allows you to be more prepared and provide an adequate response. So thinking overall, when you're talking about reducing the risk of fire, how you need to think about the guidance in this respect is really looking at how your waste is received and managed on site. So thinking, oh, it's always been like this. We're challenging that perception now and starting to think, okay, so I've got this amount of waste coming in, my processing plant takes this amount of space, I need to keep that space free, but I can segregate my piles before and after they've been segregated, and then have you got an off-taker in place so your waste isn't hanging around on site for too long. So you're ultimately trying to limit and reduce the amount of combustible material you have on site for prolonged periods of time, and having a plan for how quickly you're moving it on. When you're talking about reducing the spread of fire, this is a more physical implementation you need to take into account. So physical measures to reduce the spread could be concrete firewalls. They could be introducing fire breaks, so the equivalent of firewalls, but if you've not got 6 meters to spare, the walls do a much more space efficient job. You could also be talking about suppression systems, and there's a whole range of different suppression systems out there and different specs that you can buy. It's very much a case of looking at what works for your operation and what's most suitable. When you're talking about impacts, I've spoken about this a little bit already, but you're looking about controlling your fire water runoff, looking if there's anything you can do within your site to make sure a fire is extinguished more effectively, so sheltering times might be reduced for vulnerable people nearby, thinking about if you've got a very sensitive receptor nearby, so if you've got a hospital nearby, you may not be aware that if you have a prolonged fire on site, they may need to shut down their air conditioning systems within the building. That can prevent their operating theatres working as they can't use standard air, it has to be recirculated. So there's all these other aspects that before in operating a waste site we either didn't know we had to think about or definitely put to the back of our minds, because primarily we're just trying to make a financially viable site that handles waste in the best way we can and move it on and make the business a sensible choice. So as Peter mentioned, it's worth reflecting on who needs a fire prevention plan at the moment. So it is only if you're applying for a standard rules or bespoke permit in England. If you're applying for a significant variation, and by significant it relates to either increasing the number of combustible waste streams you have on site or introducing a combustible waste stream, or significantly increasing the amount of storage you've got on site. So again, think of it in terms of risk. By doing any of those things, you're increasing your risk on site, and therefore you need to consider the fire prevention plan guidance. You'll also need to put one in place if you've had a fire, and the EA, I'm sure, will be very quick to let you know if that's the situation. There is a slight difference in Wales in the application process, so you only submit a copy of your fire prevention and mitigation plan in Wales when you're applying for a bespoke permit. For standard rules, they just ask it's in place before you commence operations, so it's like your environmental management system. It's your responsibility to make sure it's there. So that's a very high-level overview of how it might impact on you as an operator. And the next part of the seminar, we're going to look at the potential benefits of early adoption. Let's look at the positives. So there are many reasons that you might want to consider early adoption, and it might be that you consider taking on board certain aspects. So you may look at one of these 4 elements that I've got on screen, you may look at 2, you may go the whole hog and go for a fire prevention plan early. So I'm just going to talk through these reasons and perhaps motivating factors on why you might consider early adoption. So the first is business resilience and continuity. So this is twofold. So the first aspect of business resilience and continuity, if you think about the guidance now when the EA aren't breathing down your neck to get it in place, then there's the potential for give you more time. You can think about your options. You're not under pressure to deliver a system within a certain time frame because you need to become operational, otherwise your site becomes unviable. So there's all the benefits of thinking about things earlier rather than working to the deadline. The other aspect of business resilience and continuity is if there's actually been a fire on site. So a lot of the guidance information in the fire prevention plan details are about though maybe not pitched this way, actually can help increase your business resilience and continuity. So all the measures to stop the spread of fire help, whilst they help reduce the size of the fire, the impact of the fire, they also mean that less of your site's affected, less of your material becomes damaged, you have less to fix basically before you can come back online and start accepting waste. So whilst it may seem that it's all heavy-handed and about people outside of your site, it can help you too. There's two financial motivations. The first one is the potential to reduce your insurance premiums. So I'm sure a lot of you already talk to your insurance companies and are aware of their expectations, but if you're thinking about taking on board some of the fire prevention plan guidance, it's definitely a good time to check back in with them, to check how what their expectations are. The guidance might lead you one way, and the insurance company might say to you, well, if you think about these extra 2 measures, we'll reduce your insurance premium. And then, okay, it costs you a little bit more on outlay, but year on year it could pay you back. And also with each measure you introduce, there's obviously a sensible limit, but each measure you introduce to reduce your risk of fire, you're actually helping yourself out. You're less likely to have a fire on site. So that's one financial aspect, and that's from the insurance perspective. The other one is from the EA perspective. So again, a lot of the guidance is based around fire, but if you actually trace back from what it's asking you to do, it's actually improving site performance, looking at how you operate, how you run your site, and all of these measures could lead to you ultimately having an improved opera score if you take them through your processes. We all know a lower opera score means lower subsistence payments year on year. So again, potential paybacks for adopting a fire prevention plan early. There's also the impact on people and the environment. So adopt early, you're going to have less pollution if you have a fire. Think about smoke plume, water runoff. You're going to have less social impact. And the other aspect, which isn't here but is very important, is corporate reputation. So we are all aware of some significant waste fires in the later years, and when you look online, if you Google those companies, it can be page 3 or 4 before you get to their website. By the time you've gone through the news stories and the prosecutions and all the speculation as to why the events occurred, you know, when you're as your company, you want the first hit to be, this is our website and this is a service we offer. And if that gets bogged down in bad reputation due to a series of fire incidents, then that's not really going to help your business cause. So there's some things to think about, hopefully not too scary, and some motivating factors. But the next thing to consider are the first steps. So if this sounds appealing, whether you've got to do it or want to do it, hopefully here's a few things to get you going on starting your fire prevention plan. Obviously, as I've said, we're going to cover this in a lot more detail when we get to sessions 2 and 3, but this is a starter. I would say 10, but there's only 4 topics. So you're starting to think about, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write my fire prevention plan. The first thing you need to think about is your potential ignition sources on the site. So it's easy to think about the ones that you come across day by day, and you've probably already got practices to deal with, but you need to take a step back and be objective and look at your site from an outsider's opinion, taking into account all the guidance from the FPP, and look at different ignition sources. So we all know the conventional ones. You've got self-ignition within a waste pile, you've also got arson, and you have hot works. They're 3 main ignition sources that most of us would probably think about. You've also got ones that are a little bit more obscure. So what happens if you're storing material outside and it's either firework night or Chinese New Year and a firework or lantern falls on your waste pile? Okay, we're not expecting you to mitigate against those. They're outside of your control, but they are potential ignition sources of waste on your site. And just having that awareness starts to challenge your preconceptions of what your ignition sources are. Within the English guidance, there's quite an extensive list of ignition sources to include, but that doesn't stop you going above and beyond. If there is a particular risk due to the location of your site, you shouldn't rule it out just because it's not in the EA guidance. Once you've got your list of ignition sources, the next thing you really need to do is take them one by one and think about the control measures you can implement to mitigate against those ignition sources. So for arson, it could be that you fix the hole in your fence around the back of your site, or you introduce security systems, or perhaps work with sites on your industrial estate to have an out-of-hours security guard around to help put people off, basically, of coming into your site and setting light to your waste. If you're talking about self-combustion, that you could look at how long your material's stored on site. You can look at probing your piles to monitor temperature, and if you reach a certain point, you can look at turning your piles over. You could also, self-combustion, obviously the longer the material is stored, the higher the risk. You could think about getting a more secure supply chain, so keeping your material moving. Once you've sort of got your list of ignition sources, you've got all your mitigating factors against each ignition source, and you're relatively happy that you've done all you can to reduce your risk, you need to start thinking about staff training and awareness and how you operate. So it's all well and good having a fire prevention plan that's glossy, fills the EA's requirements, looks fantastic, but ultimately it gets left on a shelf, it gets dusty, and it doesn't get implemented in your operations. So you need to make sure that your staff are aware of the processes, that they're up to date, they know what your ignition sources are and the steps you want to take to mitigate those. They're also aware of what to do if a fire happens. The last thing you want is a fire to break out on site, your staff to not be properly trained, that to result in a delay to how they respond, all allowing the fire to spread, the impacts to increase, and spiral, basically. If your staff are properly trained and they know how to respond in the event of a fire, they're aware of the steps they need to take, they've had all adequate training in order to set off the alarms, to escort people from the building, perhaps to reduce stockpile inventory if they are suitably trained and under the guidance of the fire service. So it's all about making sure this is part of your day-to-day operations. And the fourth thing to remember is that it's part of your permit conditions. So this kind of ties into point 3. It's all well and good it being a great fire prevention plan, but it needs to be practical. It needs to work for you. There's no it's all well and good ticking the EA's boxes, but if it makes your site a complete pain to run, or too expensive to run, or you just can't do all the checks that you're saying you're doing your fire prevention plan just to get your permit, you will actually be in breach of permit if you don't comply with your fire prevention plan. So you really need to be objective when you're writing it to think, is this right for me? And the guidance does allow you to vary and provide alternative solutions. So it's about identifying the points where you really need to do that within your site operations and making your point clear to the EA and working with them and the fire service to try and make a plan that works for everybody, reduces the risk, works for you financially, and hopefully prevents a fire. And so that's the last part of today's seminar. So we've got some time left now for questions if anybody has come up with any.
Okay, thank you very much, Sophie. That's been great. Whilst we're waiting for any questions to come through, let's address a couple of sort of more general points. So, one of the things I've heard about fire prevention plans is that in order to achieve compliance, you may need access to a very large amount of water. Is that right? And if so, are there any alternatives to having a lake?
So yeah, this is one of the main issues with the guidance. So as it stands, you need 2,000 litres per minute for each 300 cubic metre pile of waste. When you're talking about even a small site, you're looking towards millions of litres of water for the 3-hour burn time you need to provide. That does leave you with the option of creating a lake. There are also options of on-site storage for the amount of water you require, but I think realistically that's the level of water that is needed if you have a large-scale event on-site, which is deemed a worst-case scenario by the EA, which is your largest waste pile on fire. So that is the kind of level of water that the fire service would need to put out a fire. So there's measures you can look at. If you haven't got access to that amount of water, which most sites haven't, you could think about installing a private hydrant. You could also look at if there are any water sources nearby that you could tap into. Obviously, if you're going to go down that approach and you don't own the water source, you need to make sure that it's okay and that you have the right consents in place to support your fire prevention plans application. But that is a lot of water, and we are going to be talking in the next session with Phil about how the fire service, if they know in advance, can change their approach to fighting a fire on site to reduce the amount of water you'll need. So this is one of those elements where it's really important to have that relationship with your local fire service and to invite them on site before the event happens, to work with them to work out a plan that works. But Phil will be able to give you some insight in the next session about some kit they can use to bring in water if there isn't any available and to reduce the amount of water that's needed.
Okay, that's helpful. Clearly for many operators, one of the big concerns here is space and efficient use of space. That either reducing pile sizes will mean that they are less able to use their space efficiently, or that by having to create bigger separations between piles will reduce the amount of space that's available for waste to actually be stored in. Are there any thoughts you've got on what people operating very space-constrained sites can do?
So it's not just space-constrained sites. Sites are picked because at the point they wanted their permit, they were fit for purpose, and that was the financially viable decision they went for. So it can be an issue for small or large sites, the pile size problem and the separation distances. As I hinted at earlier, separation distances of 6 meters, if you get the appropriate firewalls in place, you can reduce that down to the width of the concrete. So if you're looking at a pile, 2 piles next to each other, 6 meters between them, if they're loose piles, you've got the slope of the material. If you're thinking about, I've not got enough space to implement 6 meters, you could bring them closer together, you could put a firewall in place. There is also the potential of using that firewall then to retain the material more efficiently. And at Eunomia we have developed a tool that allows you to calculate how much material can fit into a bay, and it takes into account the different bulk densities, volumes, throughputs, and also looks at how the material slopes in the bay. So if you're squishing more waste in, you can think about how you store it within your site. When it comes to fire breaks, I think we all agree that 6 meters on most sites is pretty impractical. So firewalls, there's a whole range out there. They range in widths, heights. It's about picking the one that's right for you. And if you speak to suppliers, they can provide specifications. Obviously, this is something they're getting asked about more now. As more sites need fire prevention plans, they're becoming included into the fire spec we're expecting from them. So yeah, there are other ways to consider. Don't get scared that you've got to have masses and masses of free space around each waste pile. There are definitely solutions out there.
Thank you very much. And there's a question about whether the timescale under which the rules might be extended to Scotland if we know anything about what's happening north of the border at the moment.
So as far as I'm aware, in Scotland at the moment, it's a bit of a mashup of the current process we've got. So they have a fire assessment as part of the permit requirements, but it's nowhere near as solid as the fire prevention plan guidance. And as far as I'm aware, there's no movements at the moment to go along the same lines. That's not to say that it wouldn't be sensible to look at the requirements the EA are expecting, but there is nothing specific coming out of Scotland at the moment saying this is what you have to do in order to reduce the risk on your site and keep your permit.
Okay, so still on it, possibly on its way, but not yet.
Not yet.
Is the situation in Scotland. And I mean, one of the things that I find really interesting is the potential for collaboration between people who are operating fairly close to one another, or where there's a question of whether you need to be able to provide all of the fire prevention plan facilities like quarantine areas or your water source on your own site. Is there anything that we can say about what opportunities there are to make use of slightly more communal facilities?
So in terms of the quarantine area, it's very clear in the guidance in England that it needs to be within your permitted boundary. So there is no wiggle room on that. There is obviously the potential of you acquiring some more land, increasing your permitted boundary perhaps. Obviously that has financial implications. In terms of water sourcing, that doesn't have to be within your site. There are other options you can think about. Some places have gone in terms of fire water storage. Some places are thinking, okay, if I've got to store all this water to put out the fire and then I've got to put it somewhere, you're basically talking about your whole site being a pond, in which case none of us want that. So there's coming out different solutions in how to deal with fire water runoff. One example of a project we've worked on is making the shed basically a bonded site. So if a fire happens, the shed within the site retains the water, the drainage seals, and it gets pumped out. I've also seen examples of people, especially on sites that have multiple uses, like fleet parking, making the car park effectively a swimming pool and dealing with the fire water that way. It obviously is not that straightforward, and if you move all your fleet to somewhere else, where are you going to put them? But these are all things, if you start to think about them early, perhaps even at the site search stage. It's not going to help you if you've got an existing site, but it's that level that we're going to have to become ingrained at, thinking about this early on in the process to ultimately reduce the risk of fire on site and comply with the regulations that the EA are putting in place.
We've been asked whether there are any good sources of case studies on fire prevention plans at the moment. I know it's still early days at the minute, really.
Yeah, it's still very early days, and in all honesty, they are so site-specific that getting best practice out is challenging. So whilst there is the dream of having a template that you can just get an off-the-shelf fire prevention plan, that's really, at the moment, not an appropriate approach. We need to be thinking about each site on a site-by-site basis, taking into account the pros and cons, and as a result, it's going to take us a long time and quite a bit of experience to learn what is best practice. There's also a lot of, as always with the EA, and when you're submitting these plans, there's always that element of uncertainty. I've heard operators have had a certain system approved for one site, put it in for an application on the second site, and it's not been approved. So that shows how tricky it is at the moment, and how the EA are really looking for site-specific solutions, and that we can't treat them all the same.
Okay. If you are in the neighbourhood of a sensitive receptor, you were talking about hospitals and schools and so on, is there any way are there any particular hints and tips we can suggest about how you manage your site operations in a way that's aware of their needs?
So the first step is to know they're there. It could be that your site's been there for 30 years, it's always been a waste site, and you've not stepped back and looked from Google Earth to see what is within your immediate vicinity, and the requirements ask you to look up to 1 kilometre away from the boundary of your site. In terms of what you can do if you've got them there, the first thing to do is to make sure that if a fire occurs, you have the means to communicate with them. It's all well and good knowing they're there, but if you need to tell if it is a hospital, you need to tell them that there's a fire broken out and they might need to take emergency measures. You don't want to be faffing around with the switchboard, and they won't want you to be faffing around with the switchboard, so you make sure you've got the contact details of the right person, you know who to call. The same with the schools, you know who to be talking to, and any sensitive receptors. You might have a business next to you where they have air-conditioned server rooms and they have to be turned off if there's a fire on site. They're going to want to know pretty sharpish, so we kind of recommend that in the back of your fire prevention plan you definitely have a key contacts list with a list of people and phone numbers that your top 10 or something within your 1K mark that you want to get in touch with if a site fire happens. If it's small enough and you can deal with it on site, there's obviously no need to escalate it to the mould, but it's just to make sure that you're prepared to deal with that if a fire happens.
Okay. Well, I think we might draw a close to the Q&A session at that point, because we will have plenty of opportunities to pick up other questions when we do our next 2 webinars in this series. I'd like to thank those who have joined us over GoToMeeting for attending. We will send you details of the next 2 of these sessions, which will take place at fortnightly intervals, so we'll be looking forward to welcoming you back in 2 weeks' time. If you found today useful and you think others might also find them useful, please do let us know. If you contact emma.how, she will make sure that that anybody who you point in her direction is added to our list for next time. If you wish to submit questions in advance as well, please do also do that via Emma, and we'll make sure that we get through them. In the meantime, would it be useful just, Sophie, to say a little bit about what you've done with Phil up till this point, and just so that people have an understanding of what Phil knows about and why he's a useful person to hear talk on this topic?
Yeah, sure. So Phil is a former fireman in the South Wales Fire and Rescue Service. So I believe he'd worked in the fire service for over 30 years, working his way up. His latter experience was predominantly in dealing with waste fires. So he has experience of dealing with waste fires on site, attending them, looking at how to stop the spread, reducing the material inventory to try and reduce the burn time. He also has been a key part of the work in Wales in working with HSE and NRW in working with site operators, looking at how they can improve their operations, making recommendations on small or significant adjustments that they can make in terms of reducing their risk and mitigating if a fire occurs. He's got some great case studies of some good examples and some ones where they just didn't follow his advice, and since the sites have been closed. So yeah, Phil's practical experience is really invaluable. It's great to have a fireman's brain to pick.
Excellent, particularly when it's still inside a fireman.
Yes.
Thank you. So that's, I think, where we'll leave today's session. So thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to speaking to you again in a couple of weeks' time.